Sebastian Lindstrom was the kind of man who commanded respect wherever he went. At 38, he had spent most of his adult life navigating the world's oceans as a merchant navy officer. Born and raised in Sweden, he had developed a love for adventure early on, drawn to the sea and the endless possibilities it offered. His job paid handsomely, allowing him to live a comfortable life, but it came at a cost. He was often away for months at a time. Despite the long absences, Sebastian had built a seemingly perfect life with his wife, Isabella Moreau. At 33, Isabella was a strikingly beautiful Frenchwoman with piercing brown eyes, dark flowing hair, and a charm that captivated everyone around her. She had met Sebastian 5 years earlier while vacationing in Spain. Their romance had been a whirlwind, passionate, intense, and full of promises. Within a year, they were married, settling in Barcelona, a city they both adored. From the outside, their life was enviable. They lived in a luxurious seaside villa, drove expensive cars, and traveled the world whenever Sebastian was home. Isabella's social media was filled with pictures of exotic vacations, candlelit dinners, and smiling couple selfies. Friends and family admired their love story, believing it to be the kind of romance people dreamed of. But behind closed doors, cracks were beginning to form. Sebastian was devoted to his work, often leaving for months at a time. He reassured Isabella that his sacrifices were for their future, that every voyage meant financial security, a better life, and more opportunities. But for Isabella, the long months of solitude became unbearable. First, she tried to distract herself. She joined a yoga class, took up painting, and attended social events with other expatriates. But no matter how busy she kept herself, the loneliness gnawed at her. She missed having someone to hold her at night, someone to share intimate moments with, someone to make her feel desired. Sebastian, ever trusting, never suspected that his absence was creating a void Isabella was desperate to fill. Isabella was no stranger to male attention. Even as a married woman, men flirted with her, charmed by her beauty and grace. She enjoyed the compliments, but she never crossed the line until she met Kieran Novak. Kieran was everything Sebastian was not. A 36-year-old Croatian expatriate with a rugged look, Kieran had an air of danger about him. He was mysterious, unpredictable, and lived by his own rules. He ran an antique store in the heart of Barcelona, a place filled with eerie artifacts, strange symbols, and an unsettling aura. Locals whispered that he was involved in black magic, but Kieran never confirmed or denied the rumors. Isabella met Kieran at a private party hosted by a mutual friend. The moment their eyes locked, something shifted inside her. He spoke in a deep, hypnotic voice, his words laced with a strange kind of wisdom. Unlike the polished and disciplined Sebastian, Kieran was raw and uninhibited. He made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. That night, Isabella felt the first pangs of guilt. But it wasn't enough to stop her from seeing him again. By the time Sebastian returned from his latest voyage, something about Isabella had changed. She was colder, distant, and preoccupied. She no longer greeted him with the same enthusiasm, and their intimate moments felt forced. Sebastian, unaware of the storm brewing, dismissed her behavior as exhaustion or stress. He assumed she needed time to adjust to his return, believing their love was strong enough to withstand any temporary distance. He had no idea that Isabella was already too far gone, that another man had taken his place in her heart, that in the shadows of their perfect marriage, a dark and sinister plan was taking shape. And by the time he realized the truth, it would be far too late. Kieran Novak was no ordinary man. He thrived in the shadows, his presence unsettling yet oddly magnetic. A Croatian expatriate who had lived in Spain for over a decade, he owned a peculiar antique shop tucked away in a narrow alley in Barcelona's Gothic quarter. The store, La Sombra Antigua, the ancient shadow, was unlike any other. It reeked of age-old incense, and its shelves were filled with dusty tomes, strange trinkets, and relics that seemed to hum with energy. Rumors swirled about him. Some said he practiced black magic. Others claimed he had ties to underground cults. Kieran neither confirmed nor denied the whispers. Instead, he let the mystery fuel his allure. He was a man who spoke little but exuded power. It was this darkness, this forbidden energy, that drew Isabella to him. Their affair started innocently, if betrayal could ever be called innocent. At first, Isabella told herself she was only intrigued by Kieran, that she was simply escaping the monotony of waiting for Sebastian. She convinced herself that nothing serious would come of it. But Kieran knew better. He saw the hunger in her eyes, the way she longed to be freed from the golden cage of her marriage. He fed her desires, pulling her into a world she had never known before. Their meetings became secret rituals, always after dark, always at his shop or in hidden corners of the city where no one could recognize them. Kieran introduced her to things that thrilled and terrified her. Rituals, chants, symbols drawn in candle wax on her bare skin. He whispered forbidden words in her ear, telling her they were bound by fate, that Sebastian was a barrier they needed to remove. Isabella, drunk on lust and obsession, believed him. As their affair deepened, Kieran became more possessive. He was no longer satisfied with stolen moments. He wanted Isabella to be his entirely. And for that to happen, Sebastian had to disappear. At first, Isabella resisted. Murder was unthinkable, but Kieran was patient. He planted the seed of doubt, telling her that Sebastian would eventually find out and ruin her life. He spun a narrative in which Sebastian was the villain, the man who had abandoned her, who had trapped her in a lifeless marriage. Slowly, Isabella's guilt turned into resentment. One evening, as she lay tangled in Kieran's sheets, he finally said it aloud. He has to die, but not just any death. It has to be a sacrifice. Isabella shivered, but not from fear. She was ready. She would become Kieran's, completely and eternally. And soon, Sebastian Lindstrom would breathe his last. Sebastian Lindstrom had spent the past 6 months navigating treacherous waters, enduring long nights at sea, and dreaming of the moment he would return to his wife. As his ship docked in Barcelona's bustling port, he felt the familiar rush of excitement. He had missed Isabella terribly. Though his career in the merchant navy provided them with wealth and security, it came with sacrifices. Every homecoming was supposed to be a joyous reunion, filled with passion, laughter, and rekindled love. But this time something felt different. When he walked into their grand seaside villa, expecting the warm embrace of his wife, he was instead met with a distant, almost indifferent Isabella. She smiled, but it was forced. Her kisses were cold. There was no excitement in her eyes. Sebastian brushed it off at first. Perhaps she was tired. Maybe she had grown used to life without him and just needed time to readjust. But deep inside, a seed of doubt had been planted. Over the next few days, Sebastian observed unsettling changes in Isabella's behavior. She was secretive, her phone always locked, her movements unpredictable. She often left the house late at night, claiming she was visiting a friend. But when he pressed for details, she became defensive. One evening, he noticed something even more disturbing. As he stepped into their bedroom, he caught sight of something odd beneath their bed. Curious, he crouched down and pulled out a small, tattered notebook. The pages were filled with strange symbols, bizarre drawings of inverted pentagrams, and what appeared to be spells written in a language he didn't recognize. His heart pounded. This was not Isabella's usual reading material. Determined to find answers, he searched through her drawers and found more unsettling objects. Black candles, vials of unidentified liquid, and an old necklace with a pendant shaped like an animal skull. Sebastian's stomach twisted with unease. Who had his wife become? That night, unable to sleep, Sebastian decided to follow Isabella. As she slipped out of the house past midnight, he trailed behind, staying hidden in the shadows. She moved through the darkened streets of Barcelona with purpose, eventually arriving at a shop he had never noticed before. La Sombra Antigua. The place looked eerie, its windows filled with strange artifacts. As Isabella entered, Sebastian saw a man standing in the doorway, waiting for her. Tall, broad-shouldered, there was something sinister about him. Sebastian's blood ran cold as he watched his wife fall into the man's arms. She kissed him, Passionately, desperately, Sebastian clenched his fists, rage boiling inside him. His wife was having an affair, but he had no idea that betrayal was the least of his worries, because the man she loved was no ordinary lover, and the two of them were already planning his death. Isabella never expected Sebastian to return so soon. His early arrival had disrupted the careful web of lies she had spun over the past 6 months. But Kieran had warned her this would happen. She had to act fast. The night after her secret meeting with Kieran, Isabella returned home to find Sebastian awake, sitting in the dimly lit living room. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held something unfamiliar: doubt, suspicion. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Isabella's heart pounded. She had rehearsed this moment. "With Claire," she lied, forcing a casual shrug. "She's going through a rough time." Sebastian stared at her for a long moment. Then he sighed, rubbing his temples. "You've been acting strange. I found something in our bedroom. A book, symbols." She felt a chill crawl up her spine. "What are you talking about?" she interrupted, forcing a nervous laugh. "You've been gone for months, Sebastian. Maybe you're just imagining things." But she knew the truth. Sebastian was getting too close. The next night, she met Kieran again, this time in the candlelit basement of La Sombra Antigua. The room smelled of burning herbs and old parchment. Strange artifacts lined the walls: human skulls, preserved animals, and eerie paintings of shadowy figures. Kieran paced slowly, his fingers tracing over the worn wooden table. He listened as Isabella explained the situation, then turned to her with an unsettling smile. "He's already suspicious," Kieran murmured. "That makes things easier." "What do you mean?" Isabella whispered. Kieran leaned closer, his breath warm against her cheek. "We can't wait. He must die soon. And he must die our way." He reached into a small wooden box and pulled out a vial filled with thick, dark liquid. "Poison," he explained. "Slow, untraceable. A few drops in his food or wine, and his body will wither." Isabella hesitated. She had fantasized about being free from Sebastian, had dreamt of a life with Kieran without the weight of her husband's existence pressing down on her. But to do this, to take the final step, was terrifying. Sensing her fear, Kieran lifted her chin. "You want to be mine, don't you?" She nodded weakly. "Then this is the only way." That night, Isabella prepared dinner as usual, her hands trembling as she poured Sebastian a glass of red wine. Her fingers lingered over the vial in her pocket. One drop, then another. She carried the glass to the table, setting it before him with a soft smile. Sebastian looked up at her, a shadow of doubt still in his eyes. "You're being nice tonight." "I've missed you," Isabella murmured, forcing herself to meet his gaze. She watched as he lifted the glass to his lips. Her heart pounded. And then, his phone rang. Sebastian sighed, setting the glass down. "It's work," he muttered, getting up to answer. Isabella's breath caught in her throat as she watched him walk away. The poison had been inches from his lips, seconds from sealing his fate. But fate had given him a second chance. And it was the last one he would ever get. Sebastian Lindstrom had unknowingly escaped death once, but Isabella and Kieran would not make the same mistake again. The failed poisoning had only made them more desperate. Kieran insisted they needed a more brutal final solution. One that involved blood. One that involved sacrifice. Late at night, in the candlelit basement of La Sombra Antigua, Kieran prepared for what he called the ritual of severance. He claimed it was not just about killing Sebastian. It was about cutting him out of Isabella's soul, so she could be reborn into a new life. "This isn't just murder," Kieran whispered, his fingers tracing ancient symbols into the wooden table. "It's power. His death will bind us together forever." Isabella, already too deep in the abyss to turn back, nodded. The plan was simple. Sebastian would die at home, and his body would disappear forever. On a cold autumn evening, Sebastian arrived home, exhausted from a long meeting. The house was unusually quiet. Isabella had prepared his favorite meal, lit candles, and even poured him a glass of whiskey. something she hadn't done in months. He should have suspected something, but he was tired, distracted, and still believed his wife loved him. As he sat at the dining table, Isabella moved behind him, her fingers gently massaging his shoulders. "You're always so tense," she murmured. Sebastian closed his eyes, exhaling. That was the last peaceful moment he would ever have. Because the next second, Kieran emerged from the shadows. Before Sebastian could react, a thick rope wrapped around his throat. Kieran pulled it tight, his muscles flexing with deadly force. Sebastian gasped, his hands clawing at the noose, but Kieran was stronger. He tried to stand, knocking over his chair, his legs thrashing violently. Isabella watched, her heart racing, her body frozen in both fear and excitement. Sebastian's struggles weakened. His face turned red, then purple. His eyes bulged, veins popping against his forehead, and then silence. Sebastian Lindstrom, the loving husband, the devoted seafarer, was dead. The murder was only the beginning. The real horror came after. With cold precision, Kieran dragged Sebastian's body into the bathroom, where he had already prepared sheets of plastic and a set of butcher's knives. "We do this together," he told Isabella, handing her a blade. Isabella hesitated. She had dreamed of Sebastian's death for months, but standing before his lifeless body, she felt something unexpected, dread. Kieran saw the hesitation in her eyes and leaned in close. "You chose this," he whispered. "If you want to be free, you must finish it." Slowly, Isabella took the knife. The first cut was the hardest. The blade sliced into Sebastian's flesh, his skin parting like fabric. The sound of ripping muscle filled the bathroom, followed by the sickening squelch of organs shifting. Kieran worked methodically, cutting off the arms first, then the legs. Blood pooled around them, staining their clothes, the scent thick and metallic in the air. Isabella gagged but kept going. She forced herself to detach from reality, to see this as just another step toward her freedom. By the time they were done, Sebastian was no longer a man. He was pieces. Disposing of the body required something permanent, something that would ensure Sebastian was never found. Kieran had already planned it. In the back of his shop, he had prepared a large industrial drum, the kind used for storing chemicals. It was wide, deep, and perfect for their needs. Piece by piece, they dropped Sebastian inside. The drum was nearly full by the time Kieran mixed the final ingredient, quick-dry cement. The thick gray liquid poured over the body parts, swallowing them whole. By the next morning, Sebastian Lindstrom no longer existed. His flesh, his bones, his very identity, sealed forever inside a hardened tomb of cement. And no one would ever know, or so they thought. Days turned into weeks, and still no one suspected a thing. Isabella played the role of the worried wife perfectly. She told Sebastian's colleagues that he had been called for an urgent assignment at sea. She sent messages from his phone, making it seem as if he had left in a hurry. But doubts began to arise. Sebastian's mother, Margareta Lindstrom, a sharp and skeptical Swedish woman, found it odd that her son had not called her in weeks. He never disappeared without saying goodbye. She called Isabella. "Where is my son?" Isabella faked a sigh. "He was sent on an urgent merchant navy contract. You know how unpredictable his job is." Margarita wasn't convinced. "And he didn't even bother to call me? That doesn't sound like Sebastian." Isabella forced a smile through the phone. "You know how he is. Sometimes he gets so caught up in work." It was enough to pacify Margarita for now. But the real problem came when Sebastian's employer contacted Isabella. "Mrs. Lindstrom, we need to discuss your husband's contract. There hasn't been any record of him boarding any ship." A cold wave of panic rushed through Isabella's veins. She stammered, He left a while ago. Maybe there's been a mistake." "There's no mistake," the voice on the other end said firmly. "Sebastian hasn't reported to any assignment." "Are you sure he's not at home?" Isabella hung up. The net was tightening. Isabella rushed to La Sombra Antigua, her nerves frayed. She found Kieran in the basement, meticulously carving strange symbols into a piece of wood. "They're asking too many questions," she hissed. "His work, his mother." Someone's going to figure it out. Kieran remained eerily calm. Let them ask, he murmured, tracing a dagger over his palm. There's no body, no evidence. But Isabella wasn't so sure. She could feel it. A storm was coming. And it was only a matter of time before their perfect crime began to crumble. It started with a smell. Weeks had passed since Sebastian Lindstrom's brutal murder, and Isabella had begun to feel safe again. She and Kieran continued their secret meetings, convinced that they had committed the perfect crime. But death has a way of leaving traces. One evening, Hugo Ramirez, the owner of the warehouse behind La Sombra Antigua, noticed a foul, putrid stench seeping from a corner of the property. At first, he assumed it was a dead animal. But as days passed, the smell became unbearable. Concerned, Hugo followed the scent to an industrial drum tucked away in an abandoned section of the lot. The thick layer of cement inside was cracked, and something dark oozed from the crevices. A swarm of flies hovered around the base. Something was wrong. Hugo called the Guardia Civil, Spain's law enforcement agency. When officers arrived, they inspected the drum, noting the rancid smell and the suspicious cracks in the cement. With careful precision, forensic specialists began breaking apart the hardened surface. As the first chunk of cement fell away, the horror inside was revealed. Human remains, a severed hand, still partially preserved, emerged from the broken cement. The fingers were frozen in a grotesque, twisted position. Then a foot, a section of ribcage, strands of hair still attached to decomposing flesh. It was a sight straight out of a nightmare. Forensic teams worked tirelessly to extract the remains, carefully piecing together what was left of the body. Though the cement had slowed decomposition, the smell of death was unmistakable. A tattoo on the left forearm provided the first clue. It was a nautical compass, one that Sebastian Lindstrom had proudly shown off in countless photos. DNA testing confirmed it. The body in the cement-sealed drum was Sebastian Lindstrom, and now the hunt for his killers had begun. The gruesome discovery of Sebastian Lindstrom's dismembered body made headlines across Spain and beyond. News outlets called it El Crimen del Tambor de Cemento, the cement drum murder. Police knew two things. Sebastian had been murdered. His body showed signs of strangulation and dismemberment. This was personal. The level of brutality suggested deep hatred. This wasn't a random act of violence. Now they had one goal: find out who killed him. The first person investigators questioned was Isabella Lindstrom. When officers arrived at her home, she played the role of the grieving wife flawlessly. She cried, gasped in horror when she learned of her husband's fate, and even clutched Sebastian's photo as if heartbroken. But detectives weren't convinced. They had already checked Sebastian's work records and knew he never boarded any ship. His phone records also showed something strange. His last messages were sent from his own home days after he was supposedly gone. Someone had used his phone to fake his disappearance. And there was only one person with access to it: Isabella. As detectives dug deeper into Isabella's life, they found something even more alarming: her secret relationship with Kieran Doyle. Neighbors reported seeing a strange man visiting Isabella's home regularly while Sebastian was away. One witness, an elderly woman who lived across the street, claimed to have seen Isabella and the man in a passionate embrace in the weeks before Sebastian disappeared. When police searched Isabella's phone, they found dozens of deleted messages between her and Kieran, some of which hinted at something far more sinister. One recovered message from Kieran read, "You're mine now. He can't stand in our way anymore." Another, "Once he's gone, we'll finally be free." The evidence was damning. Police now had their prime suspects: Isabella Lindstrom, the wife with a secret lover; Kieran Doyle, the mysterious man with ties to the occult. The hunt was on. As investigators dug into Kieran Doyle's background, they uncovered chilling details. Kieran wasn't just a tattoo artist. He was deeply involved in black magic and occult rituals. He had a disturbing fascination with sacrificial rites, blood magic, and ancient death ceremonies. Detectives searched his shop, La Sombra Antigua, and what they found was straight out of a horror film. animal skulls and dried blood in ritualistic patterns. Candles arranged in pentagrams across the basement floor. Handwritten notes describing severance rituals and how to unbind a soul. A small vial of blood labeled Isabella, suggesting she had willingly participated in his rituals. The final piece of damning evidence? A notebook detailing Sebastian's murder plan. One page read, "To be reborn, she must cut him out. Limbs must be severed. The flesh must be encased, ensuring his soul does not return." This was more than just a crime, it was a ritual killing. Detectives theorized that Isabella had fallen under Kieran's spell, both physically and psychologically. He convinced her that Sebastian had to die, not just so they could be together, but so that she could be freed. One of Isabella's recovered text messages to Kieran read, "Will it work? Will I really be rid of him forever?" And Kieran had responded, "Once the cement hardens, he will never come back." This wasn't just a lover's plot to kill a husband. It was a ritual of sacrifice. With the pieces coming together, police issued arrest warrants for both Isabella and Kieran. The manhunt began. Police tracked Isabella down first. She had been hiding in a rented apartment in Seville, likely preparing to flee the country. When officers stormed in, she was found burning letters and photographs, evidence she had tried to erase. As she was handcuffed, she screamed, "You don't understand. It wasn't just murder. He had to die." She refused to say more. At the police station, Isabella cracked under interrogation. She blamed everything on Kieran, insisting he had manipulated her with his dark practices. "He told me that Sebastian's soul was poisoning me, that we had to cut him out of my life. Literally. I was scared. I didn't know what else to do." But detectives didn't believe she was innocent. She had helped drug, strangle, and dismember her husband. And now she would face the consequences. Kieran Doyle, however, refused to go down easily. Police found him hiding in a cabin deep in the countryside, surrounded by occult symbols and ritualistic tools. When officers broke down the door, Kieran fought violently, injuring 2 officers before being tackled to the ground. As he was dragged away, he laughed. "You think you've won? You fools. This isn't over." His soul still lingers. Even in custody, Kieran showed no remorse. He told detectives, "Death isn't the end. I severed him from this world, but his spirit still roams. Isabella belongs to me now, and nothing you do can change that." The trial of Isabella Lindstrom and Kieran Doyle became a media sensation. Prosecutors painted Isabella as a greedy wife who wanted her husband dead, while Kieran was portrayed as a dangerous manipulator obsessed with black magic. The evidence was overwhelming. Text messages plotting the murder, forensic proof of Sebastian's brutal death, and Kieran's ritual notes describing the severance of a soul. Isabella claimed she was brainwashed, sobbing in court, but the jury didn't believe her. The verdict: Isabella Lindstrom, 35 years in prison. Kieran Doyle, life without parole. As Kieran was led away, he whispered to Isabella, "We'll meet again. In this life or the next." She shivered. In prison, Isabella's mind crumbled. She insisted Sebastian's ghost haunted her, standing by her cell, his hollow eyes filled with cement. She was soon transferred to a psychiatric ward. Kieran, on the other hand, continued his rituals behind bars, until one night he was found dead in his cell. He had carved a pentagram into his chest, and his final words, written in blood, read, "The ritual is complete." Even after their deaths, whispers spread. Some say Sebastian's spirit never found peace. Others believe Kieran still lingers in the shadows, waiting for Isabella.